I call the Minister for Counter-Terrorism, Minister for Corrections and Minister for Veteran Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I joined the Member for the Entrance, the Minister for Health and of course the Leader of the Opposition in offering my own condolences to the family of the Honourable Grant Mcbride. Like so many on the opposition benches, like so many of the government benches, these condolence motions are used as an opportunity for us to reflect on our relationships with those members who'd served in here that have passed. And I had 3 periods of my life when I got to know Grant Mcbride, and I acknowledge in the gallery, of course, his former Chief of Staff, John Whelan, from the Australian Hotels Association. For the industry that Grant served as Minister for, it's been a very tough couple of weeks. They also have seen the passing of Bill Galvin, OAM. And I was just thinking as the opposition leader spoke, I don't think there was a time in my life over the period I served at the AHA that I wasn't at a function with either Grant Mcbride or Bill Galvin, or normally both of them. I first met Grant, even though I'd campaigned against him in 1992, when he won the election, and the by-election, and I think the Health Minister said quite rightly it was very clear to those campaigning for Bob Graham that Grant was a very popular local candidate and would no doubt win and hold the seat. I then got to know him when I worked here as Peter Collins' press secretary. The opposition leader used the term old Labor. And I looked at Grant in the time that I worked with Peter Collins, and I did see in Grant old Labor, the Labor Party that both of my grandfathers were members of. Old Labor that had a sense of decency, and I'm not saying that those opposite or those in the Labor Party don't have that sense anymore at all. But I did remember seeing in Grant a man who didn't have airs and graces, but certainly held himself and held others around him with a great sense of respect, perseverance, passion, compassion, and indeed a love for those around him and his church. Peter Collins and Grant had a good relationship. It was a Catholic thing or something, I don't know. But I did see in both of them, I think, but particularly in Grant, a deep love for his electorate. And I often said to him when I worked here, he must have had one of the hardest jobs in the parliament because he had to leave his electorate to come here, because most of the others would probably prefer to be here than in their electorates dealing with the so many problems that MPs often have to deal with. I then lost contact with Grant after I left this place in '99, and then popped up about the same time in the hospitality industry when Grant was made Minister for Gaming and Racing. And at the Australian Hotels Association, I knew that Grant knew that I'd come from the other side, even though we'd lost contact for a few years. Not once when I was working for that association under a Labor government, an entrenched Labor government, did I ever feel that Grant had held my political position or my political views differently than or respected them any differently than anybody else's. And that says a lot for the man. He would quite happily take me into his confidence. He would quite regularly treat me as a guest in his office, quite happily talk to me about things other than politics, other than the parliamentary business of the day. And I must say that was something that helped me grow up as an industry executive, because it highlighted to me that across the chamber in this place we might say and do things, but out there we've got other things that we need to achieve. We've got to work together. And I never felt in my time as an industry CEO more appreciated or respected, or I certainly didn't get any more respect or support than I did from Grant Mcbride when I worked in the hotel industry. Grant and I then left our respective industries. He not so willing when he left the cabinet in 2007. I left the Australian Hotels Association. And his family and some of those who know his professional career would appreciate the irony of this, because I left here to go and work, I left the hotel industry to go and work as CEO of the Civil Contractors Federation, Grant being a civil engineer. And I remember the first person to contact me when it was announced that I'd taken that position was Grant Mcbride. And he reminded me that he was the only civil engineer in the party. He was the only civil engineer in the parliamentary wing, and he was so relieved that somebody else in politics had taken an interest in civil engineering. And when you look at his speeches, and I looked at one this afternoon as I was preparing for this speech, I remember reading some of his speeches, and having served a board of civil engineers, it stands out. His speeches have this sense of logic that so many of us in here miss. His speeches had a sense of understanding of complex issues. And I knew when you read his speeches, and you know, certainly as a backbencher, how quickly he needed to prepare for some of these things, he had an intelligence at a level that only an engineer can acquire. Unfortunately, when he retired and I left the Civil Contractors Federation, our paths didn't pass again. For that is obviously something that I'm very sad about. But I think on behalf of the members of the government, want to reflect on a decent man, pay tribute to his family. I mourn your loss. I think I can speak on behalf of the hospitality industry and say he was probably one of the best ministers that we ever had, albeit the only one that I've ever recalled was a teetotaling non-gambler, and that's probably why he was absolutely faultless in his deliberations over policy. But I also reflect on a man who is not only mourned by his community, but respected by the Parliament. Valet Grant McBride.
I call the member for Wyong.